My name is Michael Burrow. I am a sergeant with the HPD Homicide Division, and I'm here to provide you guys with an update on the investigation into the murder of Alexis Sharkey from last year. A caveat up front, I will not be discussing any specific evidence that was gathered during the course of the investigation because I haven't had an opportunity to go over all of that with Alexis's family and go through those details, so we won't be going into that today. I want to recognize the detectives that worked on this case. A lot of people put a lot of hard work into this. I only came on later, earlier this year, to assist. Detective Ricardo Rivera, Sergeant Jerry Young did most of the heavy lifting on the case, and they deserve recognition for that. I'd also like to recognize the Major Offenders Division of the Harris County DA's office, who provided an abundant amount of assistance in the case. This was a lengthy investigation. Our evidence determined that Ms. Sharkey was killed on the night of November 27th, 2020. Her body was found the following morning. The investigation determined that Thomas Sharkey, her husband, is the only person who had the means, motive, and opportunity to have committed the murder. We were able to eliminate other suspects that came up, some of which were brought up by Mr. Sharkey. We established that there was a history of domestic violence between the two of them, and that the relationship was ending, and that there was a pending divorce. There was also clear evidence that Thomas Sharkey had not been truthful about several key issues and statements that he made to police. Over time, we were able to develop enough evidence to have probable cause to get an arrest warrant and to charge him with her murder. An arrest warrant was obtained for Thomas Sharkey on September 29th, 2021. Because of the high-profile nature of the case and because Mr. Sharkey had been evasive with us throughout much of our time, we went very quietly about obtaining the arrest warrant, but the intent was, once he was arrested, to formally charge him in Harris County with her murder. We contacted the Gulf Coast Violent Offenders Task Force to assist us in locating Mr. Sharkey. They developed leads that he was located in Fort Myers, Florida, and they contacted the Marshals Fugitive Task Force in that area. That task force, U.S. Marshals, located Mr. Sharkey staying with a relative in Fort Myers at approximately 10 p.m. last night. They were able to make contact and establish that he was inside the residence. Mr. Sharkey avoided them, ran upstairs when he learned that law enforcement was there for him, and he took his own life using a firearm. His identity was confirmed by the relative that was on scene, by the arresting officers who had been looking for him, and by official identification that he had in his possession. The Lee County Sheriff's Office in Florida is conducting the death investigation of Mr. Sharkey. I would like to emphasize that this has been a very tragic series of events for both families, the Robanals and the Sharkeys. They've been through hell, essentially, with the attention of the public on this case. I want to put out there that no one else is suspected of any involvement in the case, and no one else is under investigation in the case. We have clear evidence that Mr. Sharkey acted alone. Both families are composed of innocent people who have been through a lot and are in pain, especially the Sharkeys right now, his family. I would ask that people give both families their privacy and space to grieve. The family of Mr. Sharkey did not know that he was wanted in the case at the time, as we were able to keep the warrant secret. Mr. Sharkey also did not know that he was wanted until last night when he was confronted by law enforcement. And at that point, I'll open it up to any questions.
Can you describe how he was being evasive to the authorities?
Well, he left the state not long after the homicide, and especially here recently, detectives made efforts to meet with him in order to collect a DNA sample from him. He agreed to do that. He was living in Georgia at the time, and detectives went to Georgia to try and obtain his DNA sample, and suddenly he no-showed, dropped out of contact. came up with a very bizarre story later on about why he had essentially disappeared. And then a short time after that incident, he relocated to Florida.
When exactly did you request the DNA? When was that supposed to happen in Georgia?
That was supposed to happen, I believe, end of July. Early August of this year. We had been making efforts to get him to meet with us to provide that sample for some time. That was just finally the time that he agreed that a detective could meet him in Georgia to obtain the sample.
So what was the tipping point where you said, this is the person who you believe killed Alexis Sharkey?
There was no one bombshell piece of evidence that suddenly shifted everything in our favor. Like I said, the investigation was very lengthy. There's a lot of different pieces of circumstantial evidence, a lot of things that we had to comb through. Mr. Sharkey's behavior and our conversations with him over time and evolving stories and the ability to disprove stories, that took time, and eventually the mountain of evidence essentially just became high enough.
But did you wait too late?
No.
You don't think you waited too late?
No.
The goal would have been to get him alive, obviously, perhaps.
Of course, but we don't really have any control over his actions in that scenario.
It took almost a year.
Yes, like I said, it was a detailed, lengthy investigation. There was a lot of various theories and conspiracy theories that came up that we had to look into and disprove. There was alternative suspects presented, including people that were presented by Mr. Sharkey that we had to investigate. So no, we weren't able to move on an arrest until we were able to get to a point that we had eliminated sufficiently those other possibilities and built enough evidence to have a case that could not only arrest and charge but convict.
Can you expand on the conspiracy theories? Was this only from Sharkey? Was it from people like on social media?
Yeah, I mean, because of the high-profile nature of the case, there was various tips that come in. There's also, family members that are trying to help, and they provide information from things that they saw on a chat board or, on Instagram. And then, like I said, Mr. Sharkey himself, in his explanation of what happened, provided a suspect description of somebody that he claimed to have seen Ms. Sharkey leaving with.
Can you talk about what led up to her death that night, what we know?
We know that Ms. Sharkey was home throughout the day and at their apartment, and that Thomas came home that evening and around 6:40 p.m. and things began from there.
But the manner of death was strangulation, correct?
The cause of death was strangulation, yes. Mm-hmm.
And, sorry, when we talk about the arrest, there was an arrest warrant, correct?
Yes.
And the U.S. Marshals were there to serve that?
Yes, they were there to arrest Thomas Sharkey.
And then were there had charges already been filed, or was that happening after the arrest warrant was served?
That was going to happen after the arrest warrant was served.
And then was there a standoff or any type of confrontation with police when they were at the home?
My understanding, and I wasn't there, but my understanding from secondhand information is that there was no confrontation, that he simply went upstairs. The marshals were aware from talking to the family member that there were firearms in the house and that he had access to them. So they waited, tried to talk him out, and eventually determined that he had taken his own life.
So he was never a threat to the actual officers?
Not from my understanding, no.
You have to ask them too, so.
Yeah.
Were they inside the house, or were they in the doorway having this conversation?
You'd have to ask them.
I'm sorry?
You'd have to ask the marshals that question, not us.
They haven't told you where they were?
I haven't got into every detail of the arrest situation with them, no.
What happens now?
Now, we have some laboratory work left to do. We already had some lab results pending regarding DNA evidence, but now that we have Mr. Sharkey's DNA sample, of course, we'll have to get that from Florida and be able to compare that to the ongoing analysis that's happening right now. Ultimately, since someone else is under investigation, unless some new bombshell lead comes along that reopens that door, ultimately we believe the case will be cleared by the death of the defendant.
And his actions that night, from the time when he got home to the next morning when she was found, do we know what happened, how how she ended up, like, the means of all that?
That's part of the specifics that I don't want to get into until I have a chance to speak with her family about all that.
How the family feels now that the suspect is gone, deceased?
You know, I don't want to get into too much detail about their reaction. They're aware. I can tell you this, they're very wonderful people, her parents, and they actually felt a great deal of sadness for Tom Sharkey's family.
And the relationship between Tom and Alexis, I mean, can you go into, I know you said that a divorce had been filed?
The divorce had not been filed, but we have a lot of evidence that there was a separation and that he was interested in reconciling the relationship, and she did not appear to be. No official divorce filings were made, but there's every indication that that was the direction it was going.
And there's evidence of domestic violence, you said?
Yes.
What kind of domestic?
I can't go into too much specifics there. I mean, obviously, we've interviewed a lot of people, including family and friends. We've obtained a lot of evidence in digital formats, and there's several sources that confirm that that's true.
He was physically abusive?
Yes.
You said that they had separated or were separated. Did they still live together at that apartment?
They were still both on the lease at the time, although Mr. Sharkey had spoken to the management about being removed from the lease and leaving the apartment to Alexis.
Did he live somewhere else at the time?
It appears most of the nights around that time he was staying elsewhere. There were a couple of nights that he appeared to be at the apartment, but other nights it appears he stayed elsewhere.
Do you know when he left Texas, and did he go immediately to Georgia from Texas, or did he go somewhere else?
Like I said, we established that he left the state within the first 2 weeks of the investigation. I don't want to get any more specific than that at this time.
And like when you were talking about domestic violence before, they should know that it's not like there are any HPD reports of domestic violence, because we don't think that Alexis came.
Correct. We don't have any official police reports that Alexis made or that anyone made on her behalf. We are going off of statements that she made to other people and other documentation that we have that I can't get into.
Did she was going to an agency or anybody from women's or something like that, or?
No, I believe that she probably believed that the divorce, the separation would resolve the issue.
Any other questions before we have a Spanish speaker?
Could you spell your name? I don't think we got that. Thank you.
B-U-R-R-O-W, Burrow. First name Michael, standard spelling.
I have one more. What was it like for you joining this case that was very high profile even before you jumped on?
I mean, honestly, for me, like I said, a lot of the heavy lifting had already been done by the detectives that did excellent work on the case. I simply assisted by kind of helping them go through everything and pull the big picture together and tie up some loose ends.
Are they still on the case, or they were doing other things now?
Sergeant Young promoted within the department, and when you promote an HPD, you have to go to a different assignment, so he's not currently assigned to homicide, but we're hopeful to have him back. Detective Rivera here is still assigned to homicide, and we both are assigned to the case.
Did she ever make any statements to friends or family that she was in fear for her safety with him, or?
That's a specific I don't want to get into right now.
And did all the attention from the media, did that make the case harder to solve?
Of course. Not just the media, but the social media element. You know, because of her online social media attention and fame. Again, you know, like I said, there's a lot of good information can come from that, but a lot of noise can come in from that factor as well.
And that's what you would say would make the investigation longer, sorting through all of that?
Yeah, it's definitely a contributing factor.
Would you make any comparison to the other high-profile case, Gabby Pepito, where like people were going nuts online about it? Well, how would you say that kind of scenario is similar?
In that respect, sure. I mean, it's similar in the sense of the public attention devoted to it, and just the day and age in which we live, where we have, you know, an abundance of internet sleuths and sometimes outright internet trolls that like to dig up information and put things out there and say things. So it can be very difficult for the families involved because they see these things and they want to bring it to our attention. They want to do everything that they can to help. And It's often very painful for them to read the things that people post online, but that's the situation where we find ourselves.